Let's take a break from the Trump news for a second. We've been talking for years about how to reduce the number of abortions. I am someone who is pro-choice, but I would like to reduce the number of abortions to zero if possible. And we know what to do. If fewer people get pregnant in situations where they don't want to have a child, or for whatever reason, it would be a bad idea for them to have a child, you're going to reduce the number of people who want abortions and thus reduce the number of people who seek out and get abortions. We know that comprehensive sex education combined with access to contraception and the knowledge about what to do with it is how you reduce unintended pregnancy and thus how you reduce abortion. Republicans, conservatives, religious rightists, they say they want to reduce abortion, but then they oppose comprehensive sex ed and access to contraception. Well, the abortion rate is at an all-time low, and it has nothing to do with attempts to, quote, ban abortion by the religious right and Republicans. It has everything to do with better and increased access to birth control. U.S. women are having abortions at the lowest rate since 1973, which is the year of the decision Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion. And even though the American right continues to say we have an abortion crisis of historic proportions, the abortion rate has been declining for decades. Let's take a look at a graph about this. And as you can see, since reaching a high in roughly 1980 is what it looks like according to this graph, we have seen a steady and continued reduction in the abortion rate. And interestingly, when you look at the raw numbers, the number of recorded abortions fell below 1 million for the first time since the mid-1970s in the most recent year for which we have data, which I believe is 2014. This is particularly notable because the population today is way bigger than it was in the 1970s, and yet we still have, in the aggregate, a very, very low number of abortions. And of course, that just tells us how drastically the rate has been reduced. So why has this happened? I sort of alluded to it already. Better access to high quality birth control, living in cultures that treat contraception as less taboo. This is a fascinating reality, Pat. If you look at the countries where there's limited access to legal abortion, and both abortion and birth control are more taboo, like in developing African countries, in some Asian countries, in some Latin American countries where abortions are both difficult to come by and also highly, highly stigmatized. Abortion rates have not gone down over the last several decades. The decrease in the worldwide abortion rate has been driven by the countries where abortions are less taboo and where both abortion services and birth control are more accessible. Think about that for a second. The so-called pro-lifers want fewer abortions, yet we are seeing abortions lower than they've been in decades in the US because we have more sex education, more access to birth control, both things that the rightists don't want.
And if it's really about lowering the number of abortions, which I think everyone can agree is the goal that we should have,
yeah,
I think people on the right should come around to this idea because treating it as less taboo and increasing the amount of places people can go to,
sure,
increasing sexual education and contraception programs, that's what's going to do that.
Yeah, and they don't care. It's partially based in this sort of strict father morality religious idea where birth control is like a cheat code in a video game, right? No. If you are actually going to not have an abortion, it needs to be because of abstinence-only sex education or your religious values or accepting Jesus into wherever. You need to accept him and to prevent pregnancy from happening. They see birth control as a cheat code of sorts. They see sex education as something that will corrupt our children's minds. Think about this statement from the researchers in this study, which is exactly what I've been saying for years. Fewer women had abortions in 2011 than in 2008 because fewer women became pregnant when they didn't want to. Mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. So let's explore what the anti-choicers will say when they read this report. They'll say, oh, you know what? If you look at the U.S., the decrease in abortions must be in the states of the United States that passed abortion restrictions. Flat out untrue. Let's take a look at our next graphic, Pat, and you will see that there is no pattern between the abortion rate going up or down and abortion restrictions being passed. And for people who aren't looking at this graph with me, number one, if you look at the states where there have been larger than average declines in the abortion rate, there are actually more states on that list that did not pass new abortion restrictions than those that did. If you look at a bigger list of states that had a modest decline in the abortion rate, you will again see that a majority of them passed no new abortion restrictions. And lastly, there are 7 states which from 2011 to 2014 saw an increase in the abortion rate. Of the 7 states that saw an increase in the abortion rate, 4 passed new abortion restrictions. And yet, the abortion rate still went up. This is relevant. Why? It's relevant because under Trump, we may see strong attempts to completely ban abortion at the federal level. Supreme Court Roe v. Wade aside, Pat, we have a new bill introduced by lunatic Republican Congressman Steve King from Iowa. It's H.R. 490. It would prohibit all abortions at the federal level as soon as a fetal heartbeat is detected. That can be as early as 6 weeks into the pregnancy. This can be before some women even know they're pregnant. This is effectively a total abortion ban. This is what we have to look forward to.
And I think Roe versus Wade being overturned isn't completely off the table, regardless of what Donald Trump's position on abortion is. He claims to be pro-life, but even just as recent as a decade ago, he claimed to be pro-choice. It doesn't matter because if he puts people on the Supreme Court and has a litmus test and makes sure that they are in favor of eliminating abortions and being pro-life, what does that matter in the end?
Yeah, ultimately, it's going to depend on who is on the Supreme Court, and Donald Trump will have a role to play in that, and whether there is a concerted effort to get a case up to the Supreme Court during a time when the Supreme Court may lean in the anti-choice direction. This could get really bad. I'll have more information about that bill for you if it looks like it might have a shot at becoming federal law. Send me your thoughts about this. I'm on Twitter at @Pakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Let me know what you think about this. Today's program is made possible in part by Blue Apron. I love cooking at home. I would say that I cook at home probably just about every weekday at minimum. And one of the things I sometimes run into is I know I'll want to make something and I buy the ingredients I need for it, but I end up with leftover ingredients and I didn't properly plan for other recipes to use the rest of that ingredient in. And although I do everything I can to prevent throwing food out, sometimes I end up with food that I didn't use that goes bad. And that's what I love about Blue Apron. You select the meals you want for the week, and then you get a shipment from Blue Apron with the exact amount of each ingredient that's necessary for the recipes. And because they're clever, because the system has been designed in this way, if 2 of the recipes require garlic, you will get the amount of garlic that you need for both recipes, no more, no less. You have exactly what you need, but not too much. And I love it when I don't waste food. Some of the meals available in January include spaghetti squash and marinara with mushrooms and garlic knots, and the one that I made last week or the week before, spicy shrimp and Korean rice cakes with cabbage. Delicious, excellent. Really, really liked it. And it's not something I would really ever think of making on my own if I'm just wandering through the grocery store grabbing ingredients. You can check out this week's menu and, this is great, get your first 3 meals for free with free shipping, of course, by going to blueapron.com/Pakman. It will taste good, it will feel good, and you'll learn something about cooking that you might not otherwise know. blueapron.com/Pakman, Pakman. Support Blue Apron and support The David Pakman Show.